We are back. The gentleman next to me is Mr. Prizgar Gonzales. Prizgar, good evening.
Good evening to you, Selwyn. It's truly a pleasure being here with you.
Wonderful. Let me just start by saying Prizgar Gonzales is a writer fueled with a passion for Chinese history and an enthusiastic proponent for demystifying the rise of China. Currently living in Chicago with his wife Vila, the love of his life, Prizgar is focused on writing, speaking, and consulting on the seminal story of the 24th century, the rise of China and Africa's role in the mix. Love that. Welcome to CWS and congratulations on completing your three books, Prizgar.
Thank you very much, Selwyn.
Prizgar, you were born in Trinidad, born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, from what I understand. Can you give us a glimpse into the life of the 9-year-old Prizgar, the 16-year-old, and who he became at 21? Continue with the show. Prizgar, before the break, I asked you to consider a question. And the question was you reasoned that Africa needs a business mentor and China is the ideal choice. How do you support that argument?
Well, China is not an imperialist nation, and China is also a socialist nation. Those that man you mentioned earlier, Choi and Lai, he went to China in the 1970s when China was still poor, and they built a 1,800-mile railway in Tanzania. So, being a socialist nation, uh, Mao has always been. Remember, Mao and Deng coined the words "a third world,"
Mm-hmm.
and they always wanted the poor nations of the world to rise when they rise. But the Chinese have a word they say win-win and cooperation. Um, China became rich by bartering. When China had no money, they bartered with their arch enemy, Japan. China had oil, they had coal, they had iron, but the Japanese had a lot of money then. China said, which was Deng. Deng says, okay, Japan, you come here and you build our nation, and we will pay you in oil, coal, and iron. This is exactly the same formula that China is using with Africa. Now, the Chinese current prime minister right now is in Africa. Today, he was in Ethiopia. And he's telling Ethiopia with the same thing. We will bring in all our technologies. We will build high-speed rail, roads, you name it. And you pay us in your natural resources. Now, what China did was with their natural resources is multiply it, and they became rich after they got paid by the Japanese, and they took what they got from the Japanese and they multiplied. Now, with the Chinese are helping Africa and they're doing business with Africa, but what African leaders do with that money, that's their call. It's not the Chinese call. And China came from the depths of hell as far as poverty is concerned, and were able to lift close to 1 billion people out of poverty. And they know how to do it because they were in the same economic hellhole as Africa, and they know how to do it. Now, France ain't going to do it. England is not going to do it. The United States is broke. They're not going to do it. The only nation nation on earth that could help uplift and do business in a holistic way is China.
Prizgar, you're from Trinidad. We're both from the Caribbean. What is the Caribbean missing out in this economic explosion that is taking place in China?
Well, I think the Caribbean, there are a couple of smart nations in the Caribbean. I like the island of Grenada because they have a close relationship with China. When you're going through with the airport in Grenada, you see with the custom officers have a Chinese pin on their shirts. I was amazed when I saw that. I mean, I still have to delve into that deeper to find out, what's going on. But you're seeing a lot of quiet development in Grenada. No fuss, no fight, just quiet development. Now, the past government in Trinidad, which was Patrick Manning, he had the right idea, and everybody demonized him for doing business in China. Even the Calypsonians sang song about the Chinese taking all the jobs and stuff. But if you were in Trinidad at that time, Selwyn, you saw Chinese workers sleeping on the job. They will take, 3 stones and put wood under the stones, and they will take a pot and they will cut up a chicken and they will have their meal, and as soon as they eat the meal, they back to work. Now, I knew that the reason why the Trinis were already complaining is because the Chinese were just working harder than they were. And Trinis like to lime and they like to party, and and when they're working, they like to have a bottle of rum and work and stuff. But it was jealousy, I thought. And, and they ran the Chinese away. But everything that's good in Trinidad now, as far as architecture, was built by the Chinese. Anything new I'm talking about. But slowly, I think people are beginning to realize, one, that the West is broke. Jamaica is faced with a similar problem where the new prime minister wasn't in Portia. Portia is eager to bring the Chinese in and do business, but the colonial mentality, the Chinese is coming to, take our thing and do. But in business, if you sit around the table, there's a pie. And it's according to your negotiating skills, it's according to the slice of the pie that you're going to get. And the Chinese are, smart and they're clever and they know business. But if Africa could just sharpen their business and negotiation skills, and the Caribbean people, they could be equal partners. The Prime Minister of China told the President of Ethiopia today, we want equal partnerships. Nobody is superior, nobody is less. But when you come around the table, you got to know what you want. I wouldn't blame the Chinese for that. China,
as you claim, Prizgar, could you just pull your screen a little bit to you? Your chin is getting cut off. Good, wonderful, excellent. Okay. You spoke of the age-old, of the historical relationship between China and Africa. And one of the things that comes to mind is Pan-Africanism, which speaks to self-reliance.
Yes.
The originators or some of the main players like Ahmed Sekou Toure, Kwame Nkrumah, Muammar Gaddafi, who was pushing for this and who believed that Africans not only have a common history, but also have a common destiny. Their destiny and history are intertwined, both on the continent and throughout the diaspora. Do you think that some of those players would embrace the relationship between China and Africa today?
Absolutely, absolutely, because what the West has really done a good job as far as demonizing China, but Africans in the West and Africans in Africa are finding out more and more that the Chinese are sincere about business. That man that you mentioned earlier, Chou Enlai, he had a saying that no business at gunpoint. The Chinese will never bring a gun to your nation. Never. They have never done it in their 500-year history. Whereas for the imperial nations, France, Portugal, England, the United States, they are imperial nations. And they take, and they take. And these countries have never given Africa any cutting-edge technology. But today, the Prime Minister of China told Africa, any science that we know, you're going to have it also.
What
And that's a good deal. What Africa take it and do with it, you know, that's a different story.
is Pan Africanism dead, dormant, um, or is it dead or dormant, or is it in full swing? What is your
Well,
take on that?
well, right now it's in a slumber, you know, it's sleeping.
Uh
But
huh.
I think the way I envision it as a historian is the more Africa become wealthy, and is the more Africa is going to go towards that road you're talking about, being a united nation,
Mm-hmm.
a united continent, because that's when they're going to have their full potential. There were a lot of great people, W.E. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore. They all wanted exactly that. But, but the West is good at dividing and conquering. And what they did, you know, and it's sad that we fell for it. They demonized Africa, whereas we Africans in the West began to demonize Africa. We cut all our connections to Africa. But, you know, as you said, but the pendulum is always swinging and it's going to come back to that. And I think the more Africa um, become wealthy, I think the more they're going to realize that we have to unite. Right now, everybody is fighting for who's to be the chief. And, you know, understand, Patrice Lumumba, he was a great man who wanted Africa to come together and unite. But he said that we have to get rid of tribalism, and we have to get rid of all the differences that we have. Africa's problem is tribalism. And but the imperialists had a problem, had a big part in doing that, because when they went to Africa and they chopped up Africa and everybody had a slice, you know, they cut up tribes and, you know, they've been warring since. But time is the great healer and the great equalizer. And I think in time, I think your children is going to see it, Selwyn. You know, I truly think so. I don't know if I'm going to see it, but I think it's going to happen because, you know, it must happen. It must happen.
You know, I wanna touch on these three books that you wrote about China. But let's start with the Beijing Maestro. How did you come up with that title, and what was the trigger that got you to writing this particular book? And what did you hope it would accomplish?
Well, you know, Selwyn, you know, I'm a Trinidadian, so I write like a Calypsonian, you know. So, and in Trinidad, we give everybody, you know, as long as you're in show business, you know, you get a sobriquet. So I looked at this man and I saw what he did, and it kept coming back to me. He is the economic maestro. He is the economic maestro because he took 1 billion people and says, let's get our act together and let's get rich. And he orchestrated it. He came to America and he begged. He went to Japan and he begged. He says, he went to Japan, Selwyn, and he says, if you're ugly, it make no sense pretending that you're handsome. So he wasn't false about anything. And he came to America and he went, but Jimmy Carter was president then, and, George Bush Sr., they were around at that time. And he had an agenda, a strengthening agenda. Mm. And his agenda was, I want my people to come to America and learn science. Because he knew science was the great equalizer. Africa have to go that way. They have to understand science. Because we live in the 21st century, and they should copy what Deng did and emulate it. Because he had, there's something called the Deng theory, where he laid out his plan for China's development. And it's a fantastic document. You cannot graduate from school in China without studying the Deng theory. So I call him the maestro, and I call him the Beijing maestro. And I must announce on your show that I am getting the Beijing maestro translated into Chinese. So, and I plan to go to China and launch, the Beijing maestro there sometime in August.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, thanks. So, it was, to be honest, it was a little marketing ploy, but, as I said, I'm a trainee and we like sobriquets. And I thought it was a good fit.
The beginner's guide to doing business in China. What was the motivation behind that one? And who should be reading this book?
Well,
and can you give us a glimpse of it on the screen, please?
Oh, absolutely.
I know Wonderful. And where can this be bought?
Oh, the best and easiest place to get it, is Amazon. But if you want to read it for free, you could call your local library and demand that they get it. Mm-hmm. And, you could read it in your ebook for, on your smartphone for about $6. So, so it's, it's a good price.
Awesome.
But the first time I went to China, as a matter of fact, I went with a Rastaman, Ras Owen Stobie from your country, which is Guyana. Mm-hmm. And when we landed in China, we didn't know anyone. We just said, let's go. And he turned to me and he says, Roots, if this is communism, I like it. Because we saw police and they had no guns. And I'm talking about cities with millions and millions of people. Everything worked. Trains going 300 miles an hour. Cranes up in the air building night and day. And there was progress. And so I went to a trade fair where had all the manufacturers from China. They were under one roof. I don't care if it was a school bag or a pen or a computer or a shirt or whatever, shoes. And I saw what they were doing. And they had a great formula. They call it the MOQ, which is the minimum order quantity. So, as a matter of fact, you can look at my watch.
Mm-hmm.
In the trade fair, to be honest, I was in the market for a watch. And in China, you cannot graduate from school unless you learn English. So it was easy to communicate. So what the woman said in perfect English, she says, you could buy wholesale, or your name is Prizgar. You could put your name on this watch and you could have your Prizgar brand. So I started reflecting on that, and then I look at Beyonce and Jay-Z and all the movie stars have mastered that formula. They go to China and they go to the factories and they get their products made and they come back here and and sell it. So I wanted to share that information, how easy it is to go to China. I mean, if you have an idea for a shoe, you could walk out New York City and walk the entire state of New York, and you wouldn't find a shoe factory to make Selwyn's brand of shoe. But if you go to China, you could find thousands of shoe factories. Folks speak English. And you could have your Selwyn brand of shoe or your Selwyn brand of watch. And you could be in business by buying maybe 1,000 pair of shoes, and you could be in business. And I was thinking of ways how we in the West could revitalize business, because I think the days of knocking on a man's door and asking him for a job, I think those days are over.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be self-employed now. And the best way to do it is to go where the factories are and put your name on a product and go out in the marketplace and market it. And that is what this book does. Show you how to buy wholesale, or if you have an idea for a brand, or even though you don't have an idea for a brand, you could go to a factory, any factory, and you want to make maybe children's shoes or school bags. I met a brother in China from Jamaica. I met him in a factory, and he was getting his brand of school bags, but he's going to take it back to Jamaica and sell his brand of school bags. So for us to get into the business game of being self-employed, the easiest way I know is for one to go to China, go to a factory and get a product with your name on it. Because we must go that way. The Africans are doing it. I am really admiring the Africans rekindling their business DNA. Selwyn, in China, you see Africans doing business. They have big cities now. They call it chocolate cities. Thousands, and I think it's close to millions now, because some of the smart African nations are making deals with China. Okay, well, I want my people to study in China. I want my people to get visas so they could do business in China. And that's happening. The smart ones are really cutting those deals. And you see them multiplying, and they have families. And, if they are Muslim, they have mosque. And if you're a Christian, you go to a Christian church in China, and they have families and they're doing business. And some of the smart Africans are even buying the factories from China and taking it back to Africa. So they have their factories in Africa. You could do the same thing here in the United States, or, maybe in Guyana. You could buy a factory. Chinese sell factories, and they sell products.
We've spoken extensively about Africa, but I want to touch a little bit about the Caribbean, because for somehow or the other, I feel the Caribbean is missing out. And how do you believe your books can influence conversations among Caribbeans about China?
Well, my book really helped fight against the propaganda and the demonization of China. Because the Western masters are demonizing, especially when they think they're losing. They will demonize the shit out of you. Pardon me. Mm-hmm. And, but, time will take care of that, because we in the Caribbean have always looked to America, and we have always looked to going to France or going to England. That's what we know. Because, we used to call India, that's our mother country. As a boy in Trinidad, that used to blow me away. But that's what we were indoctrinated. I saw a video recently of the Queen of England in Trinidad in the 50s. And she left Port of Spain and she went to San Fernando. And people were coming out of the bushes, rushing and honoring the Queen. And she was just waving. So we have to purge that out of our system. Mao Zedong knew that. That's why he squeezed all the bourgeois attitudes out of the Chinese. So his hope was they could evolve stronger and richer and purer and to know who they are. Everything we are, we got it from the West. From our names to our education to our religion. We got it from the West. So we have to rediscover who we are. And that's a slow process because the propaganda is strong. But time and circumstances is going to force our hand. And I think what's forcing it is America is broke. America is $17 trillion in debt. Whereas China could go into the Caribbean, and if you make a deal with them, they could develop because they have the cash. The US government cannot do that right now because they're printing money just to save their own selves. America is the richest debtor nation in the history of the world.
What a paradox. What a paradox.
So,
sorry, Prizgar. Sorry. If you had a vision for the Caribbean, what would that vision be?
Great question. My vision would for Africa, for the Caribbean to have more closer vibration and business with Africa and China. Because right now, the Caribbean is basically, they are adrift. America is broke, England is broke, France, they are broke. Spain, they are also broke. The only people that have money on this planet now is the Chinese. And the greatest potential for wealth right now is Africa. So I would say China, Africa, and the Caribbean, it would be wise to look into that and become closer. Because America is not going to offer you any help anymore. The most American will do is come in the Caribbean and build a hotel. When last you see American come in the Caribbean and build a factory or share technology? It doesn't happen. Because it's not in their DNA to do that. They have been a colonial power. England don't come and build factories in their former nations. They don't do that anymore. For one, it's not in their DNA to do it. And two, they're broke.
If you could debunk one myth about China, what will that be?
That they are out to recolonize Africa.
Is there a positive story you always tell the Chinese about the Caribbean region? Or specifically Trinidad?
Well, Trinidad is making progress because Trinidad have just opened an embassy in Beijing. But we in the Caribbean are still Western people. Asia is strange. People tell me all the time, what are you doing in China? What are you doing there? But I tell them, this earth is my home and I go anywhere. And but historically, with the 21st century is China's century. And, Selwyn, China have always have a history of dynasties, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way I see China educating their children, I am forecasting that I'm calling it the Beijing Maestro dynasty. I guess that's the Trini in me. But I could see that lasting for 3 centuries. For the next 300 years, I think China is going to be the economic force on earth. Because they're quietly laying the foundation for it. And they have just begun. Africa and China is going to be great business partners. After China's Prime Minister leave Ethiopia, maybe today or tomorrow, he's going to Angola. Angola is one of the great economic stories of our times right now. As you know, Angola was running with blood, with wars and stuff. But they saw the light. And when the World Bank and the IMF wanted to squeeze the shit out of them, pardon me, they went to China. And China gave them a low interest loan without any interference. You see, the Chinese will never interfere in your affairs. They'll do business, but they will never tell you what to do. As the West will always try to dictate how to act, how to behave, what to do. But the Chinese will always do business, and the smarter you are, and according to how business savvy you are, you're going to be just fine.
You're passionate about relationships between China and the Caribbean. Uh, how would you convey that passion to a group of teenagers in an auditorium eager to learn about China?
Well, I think if I was a school in maybe Guyana, right?
Yes.
I was going to write with the consulate, with the Chinese consulate in Guyana, and ask for the consulate that we would like you to send a couple Chinese educators to teach us Mandarin, because I think Mandarin is going to be the language of the 21st century. Selwyn, all the rich people on the west side of Manhattan or the east side of Manhattan in the 70s, the 80s, that go to all those rich private schools, all of them are studying Mandarin. Mandarin is the language of the 21st century. Why? Because the same way English was the language of the 20th century. Why? Because America was rich. The reason why English was the language of the 19th century, because Europe and England was rich. China is the richest country on earth. So their language must be learned. And if I was a school in Guyana, I would approach with the Chinese and says, we would need help in helping you educate ourselves, in bringing some classes in technology, bringing an engineer so he could study science, bringing a linguist so he could study Mandarin, and bringing science teachers. I think independently you have to do that, because you cannot wait on the government to do it. But the Chinese have programs like that where they will send their people out, but you have to approach them, send their people out to teach. They're doing it in Africa all over. There are millions and millions of Africans now that is studying Mandarin in Africa because they have that system in place. And when they study Mandarin, then the next step is they study science. So now you begin to uplift yourself. But the way the education is now, it's like Russian roulette. You don't know, what's going on. But you have to seek help independently. So if I am a Caribbean educator, I was going to bring in the Chinese to help educate my people.
Prisgar, what are your real concerns? Your deep concerns and fears about the future of the Caribbean diaspora to connect with China and take advantage of what this economic giant has to offer?
Well, I think that the Caribbean, we're behaving as if this is not the 21st century. But it's the 21st century. And we need science. We need engineers. We need to unleash all the creative energy in us. Now, What is going to take to make that happen? Education. And in the 21st century, if you're not studying science, then you're out of the game. And so you must get back into the game because, you could be an island and you have smart people and you could study engineer and, you could make a watch, but you have to learn it. But the education system is not geared towards science. We all still want to be lawyers. I mean, you walk through my city of Port of Spain and everybody's a lawyer. But a lawyer doesn't make anything. He or she doesn't manufacture anything. You have to study science in the 21st century. So I think the Caribbean must wake up and understand that this is the 21st century and we have to study science. We could still have a good time. We could still suck mangoes and, party the way we party, but we will be an economic manufacturing nation or nations. And I still think that with the tribalism, in the Caribbean, I mean, a long time ago when Eric Williams and those people wanted to unite us, we tribalism again, everybody's fighting, well, where's the capital is going to be? Well, my nation must have the president or the prime minister, and we have to get over that.
I want to try a provocative question or theory. And I want to contrast the current leadership with the leadership of back then. You mentioned Dr. Williams, and I will call some other names. There's Errol Barrow and Eric Gary and Vera Bird and Michael Manley and LFS Barnum of Guyana. Do you believe these stalwarts, these political stalwarts, would have capitalized on what China has to offer today?
Absolutely, because I think they had a world vision then. Because in those days, remember, they were Pan-Africanism then. That was in vogue at the time. C.L.R. James, Padmore, they were Pan-Africanists. And I think they would have embraced that vision even more than this kind of eat of food kind of leader we have now. I mean, nearly every politician in the Caribbean likes to drink and they like to eat. And like in those days with Forbes was a visionary in his own way. And Forbes would have looked at the 21st century and says, man, where the West is broke, Asia has the money. The West has been an imperialist. China has never been an imperialist nation. So I think, you can't say for sure, but I think they had more depth, they had more intellectual fortitude, and they would have seen that where the pendulum is shifting and they have to move where the wealth is and where the benevolence is. China is a loving country when it comes to helping people. You wouldn't know it.
Do you think this you mentioned the propaganda of the West, of the colonial the colonial nations? Now they're practicing neo-colonialism, which to me is much more crafty. We talk where they use capitalism and business and as cultural imperialism to sort of kind of manipulate these developing countries and developing states and so on, make them dependent and so on. It's sort of social engineering. But if that exists, I am curious, is that propaganda so potent that the Caribbean leaders cannot see or refuse to see that China, in your view, is not going to try to colonize them?
Yeah, you know, the West, you cannot underestimate the propaganda of the West and the think tanks that the West, um, you see, the think tanks of the West are great strategists, and they understand human behavior, and they are great manipulators. So, but the leaders at the top are living well. So, but that's why down at the bottom of the grassroots, there's a rage. You see it. You see it in Trinidad. You see it in Jamaica. You see it in Georgetown. There's a rage. Now, that rage is is not, it's not defined, but there's a rage. And to me, that rage is self. Who am I? What am I doing? Or I live in Trinidad. What are we about? And they're seeing the 1% of the top living well. And during election, there's rum and roti and, t-shirt and, a little money pass. And the cycle is a recurring decimal. It just goes around and goes around and goes around. So there's a rage. And to understand that rage, one must look at who we are, where we came from, and where we're going, and have a holistic approach to it. Now, there's some good stories, especially Asia. One of the best countries in the world, the richest countries in the world, Singapore. Singapore had the same waywardness and recklessness by their people. There was a leader called Lee, and Lee had a tough love approach. He knew every house in Singapore and how many people lived in that house. And he had his administrators go to that house and say, okay, there's 10 people in this house. What are they doing? What are their dreams? What are their aspirations? How educated they are. What could we do to help them get on their feet? So they took a whole, and they did that selling for every single house in Singapore. Now, if you try to do that in a place like Trinidad, the legal fraternity might say, well, freedom and freedom and freedom. But if you don't have really tough love to straighten out a situation, and you have a good plan that's transparent, but you could articulate it and you could implement it. That has to be done in the Caribbean, because there's a lot of waywardness in the Caribbean. Everybody's running wild, and there's no sense of purpose. But a nation must have a purpose. An individual must have a purpose. What am I doing on this planet? Why was I born? I think that's the first question everybody should ask themselves. What am I doing here? What is my contribution? So Lee implemented that, and naturally, his mother and father was from China, and he implemented that. He didn't do it as rigid as Mao, but he implemented it. And now Singapore is like the richest nation on earth. Everyone wants to live there. So you have to take a tough love approach to cleansing all the psychological problems that we have as a people in the Caribbean. We have a lot of psychological problems because we really don't know who we are. We have been made into somebody else's image and likeness.
Mm-hmm.
We are Trini, but in the essence, who you really are. What are you doing? What is your contribution? Now, we're fortunate that we have the arts and we could, do really great things with that. But art alone is not going to do it. It must be a holistic approach because it's not everybody's a singer, not everybody could play a guitar. But you have to fulfill every individual. There's a dream in all of us.
So it goes back to leadership again.
Leadership and foresight and wisdom.
And you mentioned that you're diligently studying Mao, and I really would like to read that book whenever you're finished with it, because one of the things that struck me about Mao is that and Zhu Enlai, they both came from well-off families. Mao, I think, a planter class or a farmer class, and Zhu Enlai from the aristocrats and so on. Yet, especially Mao, had this was very adamant about equity, equal distribution in land and so on and so forth. And so I am curious to know what drove him. Here is somebody who, like many leaders, or many heads of state, I should say, rather than leaders, who could have lived high on the hog. He had the ability to do that. Zhu Enlai could have also, but yet they sacrificed all that for the people or for the future of their country or the future of all. And I'm very curious about that. But as you mentioned, tribalism and so on, and so I wonder how would such a vision be implemented in a place like the Caribbean? That would be interesting to see.
Because I would urge with the Caribbean to study Deng Xiaoping, the man I call the Beijing Maestro, because he had a holistic approach to taking a people that was in an economic hellhole and giving them a new day. And Deng Xiaoping's theory is a serious document that every student in China must study. It's mandatory. Because he showed you how to do it. If you're poor, how to get rich. And there are no shortcuts. And, we in the Caribbean, my friend Chalkdust had a great song once called Trini's a Shortcut Society. We like shortcuts, but there are no shortcuts to progress. You have to have a holistic approach to say, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to get there. And the Caribbean could do it.
I want to ask you, that you mentioned the Caribbean can do it, but with all the various factors that can impede such a initiative or an effort.
Yes.
Could with all fairness, could Deng have done this if at the time Communist Party, if the government did not have the attention of the people, the attention that came out of, let's say, force, out of fear, if Mao had not started that process and gotten there.
Great question, Selwyn. Great question. I think but the Beijing Maestro was in an ideal situation after Mao died because he found people ready. But he was so clever. Mao had a lot of communes, right? Where everybody was living in the commune. What Deng did was he says, okay, I see we have a whole lot of people in this commune, but instead of they getting involved in just, rigid ideology and Mao Zedong thought and reciting his poems and his philosophy, why don't we give those people in the commune a pen and let them make a pen?
Mm-hmm.
So he had workers ready and ripe for doing things, because you couldn't just spend your life reciting poems by Mao Zedong and demonizing people and really killing your neighbor. Deng was wise. I mean, he knew that that wasn't really sustainable. So Deng says, okay. He went to Hong Kong, and he went to all but the Chinese people in Singapore and Hong Kong, and even here in America that had money. He says, come back and invest your money in these villages, because we have workers, because Mao had them as farmers and whatever else, but they weren't very productive. And that Deng gave China in 1979 4 things as an economic challenge: make bicycles, make watches, make radios, and make sewing machines. That was and China, they got on board and the people were ready. And that's why, you might have seen images of Chinese people making bicycles. They made millions and millions and millions of bicycles. And you still see the old bicycles still in China because they have a nostalgic embrace of it, I guess. But he had a plan, and he took the people and he gave them factories, and he says, let's go to work. But the plan was an initial plan. And the initial plan was to have cheap labor, so we in the West could buy things cheaply. But now China's second phase is that they have 1.5 billion population. And now they know eventually cheap merchandise is not going to be forever. So now they are gearing their economy towards their own people. America has 11 nations that have 11 states that has a population of more than 1 million. China have over 200 cities with more than 1 million people. So there's a lot of people to do business. China could begin to do business within themselves and don't even look to the West.
Prizgar, tonight I feel that technology cheated us a little bit, but it also gave us an opportunity to speak a little bit more. And time came on us, and I went past the time because I think it was important to engage you in this discourse. I want to take this opportunity to say that I am inviting you to come back at some point, because I think that what you have done with these 3 books, your knowledge and understanding of China, and how the Chinese relate to Africa, and the importance of the Caribbean participating in this this new economic boom that is China cannot be condensed. It's unfair to condense it in one conversation. I think that for your message to fully get out, we have to have a number of conversations. But I'm inviting you to return sometime to have a second conversation. But I want to close off with a few questions, perhaps personal. But I want to start with asking you, what are you most thankful for?
For the breath of life.
And are you? Yes, go ahead.
Um, my mind.
That's
For the
important.
love of for the love of my life, my wife Avila. She's my friend. I couldn't write books without her. She's my editor,
Mm.
and she has a nice, sharp mind. And although well, she's African American, but she's a Tai Chi master. I learn a lot from her as far as the Chinese is concerned, and but she's good and she's quiet. So I'm thankful that that I have a friend like that. I'm thankful for my children and my grandchildren.
What?
But I'm thankful that I could have the time to be a historian because I truly enjoy it. I like to lecture. I mean, and if I have to send out one message is that I want everybody to remind themselves that we're living in the 21st century.
What is one?
And
Sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Salman, please.
What is one thing about you that most people do not know that will surprise them?
Oh my God, that I like books more than music.
You like books, and what kind of
I think
what kind of music calms you down,
Just
Prizgar?
melodies.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I was thinking even yesterday, Selman, I was reading this book, right?
Uh-huh.
It's just a wonderful book about the Red Guards in China, but this young girl who was ripped away from her home and became a Red Guard in Mao's army, right? And she's such a beautiful writer. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, look at all the sweet melody, because the way she paints a picture
Mm-hmm.
and she writes, it's like music, but to me, so I like books more than music. I think, folks might be surprised about that.
What kind of music calms you down?
Well, the only time, honestly, I don't really listen to music when I'm in Chicago at all. I never listen to music. The only time I listen to music is when I go to Trinity. And I go to the Panyard, and I go to Phase 2 Panyard, and I go to Trinidad All Stars and Renegades Panyard, and I go to the Calypso tent, and I get my music fix. But other than that, I don't listen to music, not at all.
Have we seen the best of Prizgar?
Oh my God! Well, the best is yet to come, I think.
In the chat room, Gary Best asked, how do we change the discourse to Caribbean-China cooperation, Caribbean-China development? Is China a benevolent partner?
Absolutely. China historically is not an imperialist nation. They have never occupied any country in the world. They do business. And if the Caribbean is smart, they will do business with China. That's my message.
I think there's another part of the question. He asked, how do we change the discourse to Caribbean-China cooperation?
Well, it's going to be a heavy lift because our leaders are ingrained in Western thought, and but Black Stalin says more come. So you never know where the seed is going to be planted and who is going to emerge. But I think the more we open up and learn that's my mission, is to educate anyone that wants to listen that China is the strongest nation in the 21st century, and they like to do business. And if you're willing to do business, I think China is your best business partner.
Chairman Mao said, "Learn from the masses and teach them."
Mm.
What are some things you learned from the Chinese and their relationship with Africa that you can teach the Caribbeans? Just a few.
Is one thing, they will outwork you. They will work 16 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Wow.
And because we are trained by the British and the Americans to have, 8 hours, and in that 8 hours we have 2 and 3 breaks, and we could, tell the boss, coming back. But the Chinese are on a mission, and their mission is to be the strongest economic nation on earth. And if you have a sense of purpose and you want to develop Jamaica or Trinidad or Guyana, you have to have a sense of purpose, not on a superficial level that I'm a Guyanese and that's it. But what are you doing for Guyana? What are you bringing to the table as a lasting contribution?
Prizgar, how I wish we had more time. You see, that question there, I am going to ask other Caribbeans that come on the show.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table? What contribution do you believe you need to make to your country, to the region?
Yes.
Do you feel you have an obligation to give back, and to give back in a tangible way? I think that's a very important question to ask.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's the question, because the Chinese always think 4 generations down the road. I'm working 16 hours a day so I could send my children to school. Wow. And the Chinese still have a sense of shame. We have lost shame in the Caribbean. If a child fail their exam in China, they feel ashamed that they're not honoring their parents. So that is a kind of energy that's hard to beat. Because first you're honoring yourself, you're honoring your parent.
But we had that, Prizgar. We had that pre and post independence. We had that.
That's right.
Where the community took care of you. Where it was, you were considered not cool if you were not one of the bright boys. The girls didn't want to dance with you. They didn't want to deal with you. When did we lose that?
Right.
When did we lose that?
Yeah, well, that is, I think what helped us lose that was the remote control.
I agree.
We stayed home and we had 250 channels, and we started to get obese, and we started to eat, and we ain't cooking no more, and we ain't,
We become desensitized.
And Western influence is a dangerous thing, you have to know yourself, and you have to stay true to who you are and understand where you came from and how it used to be. We could regain it, but it's a hard fight, because a new generation might have to really begin to do that. Mm-hmm. Because right now, as I say in Trinity, that generation going through, and they have no sense of purpose. To me, sometimes when I see young people in the Caribbean, to me they have a spirit of a hyena. They have no feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know. I'm not a scientist, but if you have really cocaine in your sperm, but the child is going to end up, with that kind of vibration, Whereas you and I, our parents had mangoes in their sperm. And tropical fruits. So we had a different DNA, But, the human evolution is a very serious thing, because we change in a very subtle way, and we don't know how we change, but we change it. But the food are different.
Mm-hmm.
The vibrations are different. The energy is different. So you are a different creature, and you don't even know that you are a different creature. But we have to take a holistic approach at looking at who we are, what we eat, what we read, and how we think,
Mm-hmm.
and have a sense of purpose. But we have to reorganize ourselves and stay away from, the demonization that's coming from the West, because the West is masters at dividing and conquering. And that's a brief story. You remember the story Roots?
Yes.
When that man, his name was Kuta Kente, was fighting for himself, he was fighting to maintain who he was. But his master beat the shit out of him, but they cut off his feet, he couldn't walk, but he was still fighting. So we have been made into somebody else's image and likeness. But so we have to look at that and, reshape who we are, reinvent who we are, find out who we are. Because inside of us is a beautiful thing, but we got to find it, we have to nurture it, and we got to keep out all the unnecessary chatter. Because we are a Western creature. But the West is dying, and the West is broke, and we are on the West ship, and we're sailing with him, and we don't know where he's going. But for a fact, that when things get hard, he's going to throw you under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could see it happening, Selwyn. We who lived here and have pensions and stuff, all the pension funds are recognizing that they cannot give John Joe $50,000 a year when he reached the age of 50 for his pension anymore. They don't have the money. So what he's going to do, he's going to say, John Doe, I'm broke. I can't give you a pension. That is the way the world is going. So I'm telling people you have to get into business and do for self, because a job is not guaranteed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do for self. You remember down in the Caribbean, we bourgeois people used to laugh at the market people.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who was selling the nuts, the guy who was selling the corn soup. Because we wanted, the government job. But it's coming back, but the pendulum is swinging back, where the market people are the people who are having a good living now. Because your job is not guaranteed in any corporation now. So I say, just do business. There's a guy from Brooklyn, his name was Seppi. He was my favorite guy. He's a famous, guy in Trinity. But he used to sell nuts. And Seppi will go to the wholesale place and buy 5 pounds of nuts. And then he will bag it into little $5 bags. And Seppi was a nuts man from a teenager. He's still alive. He's about my age, about 70 or something. And he is the nuts man. You could do that with any product. Buy wholesale, sell retail, and practice it. But the secret is don't spend the profit, because you have to reinvest it. So if you have a mistress or a girlfriend, make sure you don't spend the money, but put it back in the business.
I'm listening. I am truly listening, my brother. Truly listening. Prizgar, we must close. And I want to ask you this. When are you most happy?
When I'm writing, and when I write something and I give it to my wife and she smiles.
If you had to go back in time,
Uh-huh.
what would you tell the 15-year-old Prizgar?
But did I lose you here? Hold on. Oh my. Okay. I would say make sure you study history.
History.
Understand history so you won't be surprised about anything. Study philosophy so you learn to ask questions. Now, if you study history and you are Roman Catholic, and you begin to ask questions, well, who is a Roman Catholic? Then you will learn how you became a Roman Catholic. So then you begin to discover, and yourself is relieved. Well, oh my God. Then you can ask the question, is that really me? And when you ask yourself, is that really me? Then you begin to become enlightened and free because you are discovering who you are. So I will tell a 15-year-old, have a vocation, but study history and study philosophy. And then if you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. But study history and philosophy.
In the chat room, Gary Best asked, said, changing the minds of our people is a great challenge. Democracy would not change our thinking. Inspirational leadership would. The great nations were not built on democracy.
Well, I will call that gentleman Dr. Best. Bravo to you, Dr. Best, because you hit it on the head. China has proved that democracy is not a prerequisite for becoming wealthy and strong. You know, Black Stallion has a calypso called, I think Ism Schism. You know? Deng Xiaoping, the Beijing maestro, said, if you have a black cat and a white cat, as long as the cat catches the mice, who cares? So, you know, you could take your ism and, you know, and your democracy and, you know, and you could jump up with that, but that ain't solving the problem. Because if you have a philosophy, you can make it work if you take a holistic approach to it. And democracy is, you know, you see it in Trinidad, is dysfunctional. Democracy is dysfunctional in the United States of America. It's dysfunctional.
Gary Best said, "They simply practiced after achieving greatness." I believe Prizgar would agree that that is what China is currently doing. And JLC said, "Amen."
Okay. Well, you know, I'm honored to be part of the show. I think, you know, it started with a few glitches, but I think it ended strong. And I totally enjoyed it. And I hope that people, you know, appreciate what was shared. And you know, I think, you know, I'm a great writer. And so go ahead and read my books.
You know, Prizgar, I think the show followed the China's revolution from 1949 to present day China. It started with a few glitches, but look at where China is today. Would you not agree, sir?
Isn't that something?
Well, I have to say it to you, thank you. But one last question. I ask this of all of my guests. What makes you laugh out loud?
Oh my God. Oh my God. What makes me laugh out loud, right? When I write some prose and I say, oh my God, I catch it. You know, it's like painting a picture and I say, oh my God, look how beautiful that line is. And I will just laugh, and I just laugh out loud because it's what I enjoy.
Well, JLC said, I hear you, Prizgar. Thank you. My brother, thank you again. Any parting words?
Well, Selwyn, you know, you have become, you are a spirit that I truly admire. Because because I come from that level. I like your spirit.
Thank you.
Because sir. I think all of us have a spirit, in us. I like your spirit. I like what you do. I honor what you do. I appreciate what you do, and keep on doing what you're doing. And Let's do it again.
Thank you, my brother, and have a very good night. And God bless.
Same to you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.